Well, I'll be a monkey's uncle. Alright, y'all, this is not a game I ever expected to see happen. Tenkaichi 3 came out in 2007, alright? Dragon Ball is a big franchise, but it's not every day you see a sub-series of a sub-series get revitalized. That'd be like if they suddenly decided to make a sequel to the Spawn animated series. Alright, this doesn't happen every day. And while I can't deny that this is easily the most excited I've been for a video game since Devil May Cry 5, I'd be lying if I said I also wasn't a bit worried. Let's face it, Tenkaichi 3 is not the kind of game you see happen nowadays. Even when it first came out, a game jam-packed with this degree of content that also somehow managed to be extremely well polished was rare. Off the top of my head, there's Time Splitters Future Perfect, and yeah, that's about it. This was like getting to go to the Kanto region again after beating the Pokemon League. You just couldn't quite grasp what the heck was even going on, and it took a while for it to really set in that holy smokes, this kind of video game is possible? It was like some kind of cosmic horror, except it was a video game, so instead of flooding your brain with literal eyeballs, it flooded your cranium with serotonin. A healthier alternative in retrospect. But now we're getting a new Tenkaichi game, and a lot has changed in the gaming industry since those days. Video games have become an extremely monetizable medium, and big companies know this. It's hard to even guess what the development cycle of this game could possibly look like at the moment, given we don't even know who is making it. But at this point, it's also just naive to think that any studio or company can't fall victim to bad practices that trend across this industry on a global scale. Seriously, why is it still legal to release a product full retail price in a completely dysfunctional state, especially when that retail price has gone up even more in recent years? I don't want Tenkaichi 4 to launch with less content than any of the previous 3 titles. Not that any of them are even lacking content to begin with, but it would set an undeniably bad precedent for this game to launch in a state that doesn't live up to its legacy. Like, I think we can all agree it's kind of a meme to say that Tenkaichi 3 has 1 billion characters when 800 million of them are just different forms of Goku, but it's not really about them hitting some arbitrary number. It's about being able to create and recreate battles using any Dragon Ball characters we want. And if this game launches in a less than satisfactory state, that's going to mean hits to both its financial and critical reception, which in turn will affect the extent at which the game is supported for DLC, which itself could range from Xenoverse 1 levels of barren to Xenoverse 2 and Dragon Ball FighterZ levels of expansive. We simply don't know. Tenkaichi was basically the equivalent to having digital access to literally every Dragon Ball action figure ever. Scope of content isn't necessarily vital to a game's success, but when the legacy includes such a massively impressive character roster as this, I don't think it would be unfair for that expectation to exist for many of the players, especially when the previous game is so many years old and running on such inferior hardware. But that statement doesn't just apply to the quantity of the content. Companies nowadays have developed a very bad reputation of launching games in states that are simply unacceptable from a technical standpoint. There is no reason a game that costs as much money, time, and resources to develop as Cyberpunk 2077 should ever launch in the state that it did, nor was it acceptable when Fallout 76 did so, or the GTA Definitive Edition. And to be clear, Tenkaichi 3 is a technically impressive game. This game came out on the PS2 and runs at a solid 60 FPS, all the while rendering pretty high quality for the time textures, and not to mention some pretty spectacular animations, of which several can be happening at any given time, especially when you take the fully destructible environments into account. There's an occasional drop in beam struggles, but honestly it adds to the flair of the fight, at least in my opinion. It doesn't look as choppy as it does slowed down, and it helps to add a certain intensity to those beam struggles, or at least it did for me and my friends. But I suppose the real question on a lot of people's minds is whether or not it's fair for us to expect such a technically impressive game jam-packed with so much content. And honestly, yeah, I don't think it's unfair at all. Dragon Ball is one of the most financially lucrative global media franchises in history. If they're going to invest in a follow-up to what I would think is inarguably their most beloved game, then yeah, I honestly don't see a universe where the conversation and subsequent development don't have all hands on deck. This is not the kind of game anyone in their right mind should be half-assing, and I wouldn't blame anyone for giving the game flack if it failed to live up to that expectation. To give an example of games that both succeeded and failed respectively in living up to their predecessors, let's look at Devil May Cry 5 versus Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. Weird analogy, I know, but hear me out. Devil May Cry 5 held nothing back when it came to its mechanics, which were and always will be the defining quality of the series. They knew where the past games succeeded as well as where they failed, and followed through on fleshing out those details appropriately. Nero felt a bit bare bones, but still played really well in DMC4, so in 5 they gave Nero a shit ton of new mechanics while adding to those that existed previously. Dante played tremendously in Devil May Cry 4, but lacked the supporting content to bolster his play. So what did they do? They gave him even more mechanics and made sure to fine-tune the game to complement everything in his arsenal, except Dr. Faust. And it's not as if DMC is a particularly lucrative franchise. Like, yeah, it's a big success, but I don't think it'd be mean of me to say that it's not among the likes of Dragon Ball or Pokemon. Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, on the other hand, were advertised as AAA games coming from the single most financially lucrative media franchise in history, which itself is rooted in its gaming market. And while there certainly are things about the games to appreciate, it's undeniable that these titles are not even up to par with most indie games on a technical level, and fans deserve better. Now, is it possible that Tenkaichi 4 could launch in a state of quality not quite as extreme as Devil May Cry 5 or Pokemon Scarlet and Violet? Absolutely. In fact, I'd be willing to bet that's what's going to happen. I think what a lot of people fail to do when getting sucked up into the hype of a game is tempering their hopes with their expectations. Me personally, I hope that Tenkaichi 4 launches with every bit of content from Tenkaichi 3 as far as characters and stages, plus super content, plus movie content, plus manga content, plus soundtracks from numerous previous Dragon Ball titles, as well as a whole new batch of OST. I'd also like for a more fleshed out world traversal style story mode similar to that of Budokai 3, Tenkaichi 2, Legacy of Goku 2, and Boost Fury. I'd also like character customization. In fact, I would like character creation like that of Xenoverse, but expanded to be even better. I'd also like a wide variety of modes, including a decently fleshed out story mode with animated cutscenes and a number of what-if sagas, including some of those from past games like those of the first Budokai and those featured in Tenkaichi 3. And as far as DLC goes, you could bring in content from past games like Super Saiyan 3 Broly, the Time Patrol from Xenoverse. You could do all kinds of different things with the DLC. Hell, you could keep on making DLC for the game whenever new content comes out, like for the anime and the mangas, and even new movies. Now, do I expect all of that to be in the game? Yeah, I can't say that I do. And that's honestly okay, but it's important to remember that many of those hopes come from the standards set not only by past Dragon Ball games, but also past entries in this sub-series of a sub-series. So depending on how well Tenkaichi 4 delivers on a variety of those hopes, it could very well be the single greatest anime video game ever created, or it could be a really good one, or it could be decent, or it could just suck. We don't know enough to say, but really, I just hope it's good. And if it isn't, well, can we at least get a remaster of Tenkaichi 3? Alright, I'm sick of vendors trying to pawn that game off for hundreds of dollars, because that is some Dragon bullshit.